One is Charlene Lee, and I am broadcasting from a remote location. I'm on a family vacation. My family is over there being very quiet. And I'm talking today about how to organize for disruption. This is a big topic that I get from a lot of leaders to say, I know we need to disrupt. How do we actually organize? What comes first? Is a strategy or organization? Should we be configuring things in a very different way? I remember one client that I worked with who engaged me to say, look, we figured out what our strategy is. So now, how do we organize? How do we shift the way that we work, the way we connect with each other, our hierarchies, our reporting structures, so that we have the best organization possible to create that strategy? And so, what I'm going to talk about today is how to organize for that. And one of the things I would love for you all to share is just talk a little bit about what transformations you are going through. What are the things that you are leading? And what are the questions that you have around how to actually disrupt this? So, by all means, ask questions as we go through. And by all means, also just ask, please share what are the transformations you're going through and leading, and how are you organizing? How have you thought about changing your organizations, but also how you're not changing things? What are things that are working for you? What are things that are not? So I'm going to start with a few comments, first of all. Um, First of all, when we think about disruption and transformation, oftentimes we're talking about many different things. So I thought I would first of all define what I mean by transformations. So when I think about disruptive transformations, again, these are not the small, easy changes that you go through, incremental changes and transformations and innovations. These are big disruptions where you're really trying to make a fundamental shift in the way that you do business. Of course, there's digital transformations that are out there. These tend to be much more customer facing. They impact departments like marketing and sales and service. And they have an aspect of digitizing your operations in order to be more agile and to be more flexible in the way that you're meeting the needs of your customers because they're constantly changing. We also think about things on the back ends like IT transformations. This is when you may be taking a legacy system in support of a digital transformation to make it much more flexible and able to do things in a more agile way in the future. And then we also have support functions who are going through transformations. People at places like HR or finance or legal. And these departments go through a different transformation again in order to serve the other parts of the organization that are going through transformations. One of my favorite areas is HR because there's so much that is changing in the way that we work with each other. That HR is moving from being an organization that really focus only on hiring and training and retaining people, basically trying to mitigate the risk on the people side, to really thinking about what it means to have a relationship with our employees. And then finally, there are also operational transformations that are happening. Things on the manufacturing side, on the supply chain and procurement that are going through seismic changes. So all of these areas of transformation are constantly changing, and they require a way of organizing and making sure that the work is done in a strategic way, in alignment with your strategy, but also in a way that people understand what is going on. And so, what I'll talk about next about how I've seen some organizations organize this in a really thoughtful way as a transformation office, and what that role and function is, who the leadership is, and then also some other models. I want to thank Jay Johnson for bringing up the question around holocracy. Is that a model for organizing in the future? What about flatocracies? What about agile? All these terms that are being thrown around. So I want to see some of the comments that of people coming in. Let's see. We have Dr. M. Thank you much. Thanks for joining from India. Craig Sagalski doing an IoT Internet of Things transformation for Agra. That's great. Craig is working in trucking. Celia, thanks for joining from Madrid. And also thanks for the love of HR too. Again, one of the loves that we have in common. Chuck is looking at enterprise cloud and true agile transformations. And Anandandraj is also an HR professional. And Anand also has a question. Do you believe the new disruption will have a proper structure? Like without a structure, won't there be chaos? So that is a great comment and a great way to segue into how do you actually create that structure, that organizational infrastructure, that scaffolding, which is what I've talked about quite often. How do you provide that scaffolding for the transformation to happen? So, one of the things that I've noticed, and I think I'm a big fan of this, is the evolution and the development of something called the Transformation Management Office, the TMO. And one of the reasons why this is such an important development is that it's something different than other areas that may already exist in your organizations. You may have a project management or a program management office that's very focused on implementations, especially around new technologies. That is a very well thought of, well developed function inside an organization, and it still remains to be there. Because when you're putting in a new technology system, let's say you're putting a new SharePoint or a new CRM, the program management office is fantastic and making sure all the pieces of that are figured out. You may also be thinking transformation disruption could be run through the strategy office because, after all, they're focused on the long term, right? But their focus is much more on that long term business strategy, the overall environment of where the competitors are, what that landscape looks like. And transformation is very much internally focused around the development of new skills and capabilities and processes in order to respond to that external force. So that's not a great place for that to exist. What I'm really advocating for is this TMO, the Transformation Management Office, where the focus is much more midterm versus short term for the project or program management office. And the strategy office is very long term strategic thinking. This office is the TMO office is much more focused on making sure that people understand the big transformations that need to happen. And it fits right very neatly in between these two because it needs to have that strategic intent with your strategy office, but also take on and leverage the skills of your project management office to actually implement some of these big, broad scale projects that you have. The key difference is the transformation part. Transformations and disruptions are difficult because of the people aspect. When people are involved, it gets really hard because this is change management at a completely different scale. Oftentimes, when you're putting in a program or a new technology, people's jobs don't change. But when you're talking about transformation, people are wondering, what's in it for me? What's the impact going to be? How am I going to be able to do my job better? What do you need me to do? How does this fit into my global view of how the world works? So the TMO, transformation management, is a very different way of organizing. So I just want to go back into some of the comments here. I see them floating in here out of the corner of my eye. Let's see. We have Ilya coming in from Puerto Rico. And one question that she has is, how do you move people's mindset from one organization's design to another? So we'll talk about that in just a second. Allison is merging agile with innovation, lean and design thinking when each function is led by a different leader. We'll talk about that too as well. Let's see, what else do we have in here? We have Adrian, who is leading digital transformation in e-commerce, marketing automation. And then Jay, again, thank you again for the comment and question about Holocracy. We're going to get to that. And this is an interesting thing. TMO should be temporary and cross-functional. It defeats the purpose if it becomes hostage to career strategy. And Jay, we're going to talk about that because I think about things in a very different way about Transformation Management Office. In that I do think it should be a permanent function. I'll talk about why that should be the case. We have Peter coming in from Scotland, and Ruben is thinking about the great resignation trend and implications towards certain industries, including his industry, marketing and advertising. So we'll deal with quite a few of these questions along the way. I want to talk first of all about how do you actually organize and create some structure around this. The reason why I think that Transformation Management Office is so effective is that it plays three roles. The first one is to lead that overall strategy around transformation. Why is it important? What's the connection back to our big global business strategy? And it also has a very clear definition of roles and responsibilities. And also, that key global part of the strategy is looking at risk identification and management. These are things that happen across the entire organization. And if you don't have this, what happens is, and you've seen this, is that the transformation is happening in each of the individual silos of an organization. This federated approach works great initially because you don't need to coordinate with anybody. People in HR don't need to coordinate with marketing. Marketing doesn't need to talk to sales. Everybody can just do their own transformations in the way that they want to. But the problem is when you want to impact higher order, deeper transformations and strategic objectives for the long term, at some point, you're going to have to integrate across all of these transformations. And I can't think of a better time to do that than right from the very beginning, not later on when you realize, oh, we need to coordinate and talk about our implementation plans. So this global view of transformation is absolutely essential, and it can't begin early enough. The key thing here, I think, is that management into these groups to have somebody who's leading them in each of these departments, in each of these geographies, if that's also an area of consideration, but then rolling up into a global corporate transformation management office function. Uh, that function then applies a discipline and a practice around transformation. It puts governance and processes in place so that everybody is speaking the same language, everyone is using the same outcomes and metrics for definitions of success against that long term strategy. And very importantly, you're beginning to see and understand what everyone else is doing. You can not only coordinate, but you can also learn from each other. And an organization that works together and learns together is going to be able to reap the rewards of this almost immediately. The In terms of that global strategy, that management, that day-to-day management needs to be across the organization. But again, that TMO office also has a role in identifying all the trends and the technologies, the processes, the changes in the competitive landscape working with the strategy office, but also very importantly, understanding the state of the organization. Where are we today? And it's looking at that from a global perspective again and being able to bring it in at that cross level, but also at that departmental level that's so key. And here's the key thing when it comes to transformation, it's not just about the technology, it's also about the people and the processes that we follow. One transformation officer who I spoke with, she had worked across multiple companies, had what she called a 9-box process checklist that she had. She identified all the different processes and put them into categories. And then just whenever she started a new transformation project, would go through and identify which of these processes were crucial to the long-term strategy, and then set aside a plan to make sure these processes were identified and especially the ones that had gaps in them, they would close the gaps, redesigning the processes in many cases. That management of the processes is a key function of the TMO. And then lastly, the most important part is managing the stakeholders, the people part of this. Stakeholders, again, really are left scratching their heads oftentimes, going, what is going on? And the clear communications to them about what is happening, how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen is absolutely crucial. I spoke to one leader who put together what he called a 6-quarter walk, meaning that every quarter he was going to deliver certain things on time, on budget, and be very clear what the impact of that was going to be on the business. And then you could expect over the next 6 quarters, over the next 18 months, what was going to happen. And that created a sense of certainty amidst all the change that was happening. and people could then expect and know this is what's going to happen when, what was going to be expected of me, and what the impact was going to be on my business. So these three things, setting the global strategy, identifying the trends and technologies and the processes that need to change, and then managing stakeholder expectations are the three key functions of the TMO. So I just want to go back and just see if there are any other new comments here, because hopefully that gives you a very quick overview of some of the things that need to happen in order to just organize for this transformation. And I have a question here from Allison. How is a TMO different from an enterprise, let's say, strategy management office? And I'm trying to find the right one here. Here we go. Let's see. Let me try to get to it. And she wanted to know, how is that different from an enterprise management strategy? The strategy office oftentimes, again, is focused much more on the strategies and business and the financial aspects and implications for some of these strategies. So therefore, it's not going to be so much of a focus on the transformation itself. And what we found in seeing is that it's much less likely to be able to talk about those deep transformations. Show some of these other comments. Why is for a second? So when we think about the transformations of HR in particular, why are they not as involved? It absolutely should be involved, and oftentimes they are not involved because HR does not necessarily think about themselves as having a seat at the transformation table. One of the studies that my parent company, Profit, has done show that only 4% of HR professionals were involved in their digital transformation. And I am very keen on trying to reinforce that HR should be not only at the table, but should be driving so many of these discussions because of the human aspect of this. And because there are so many skills that are needed, especially as you're going through these transformations, to identify what those skills are and either upskill people or look again for those people. Marcelo has a comment here. He says that I'm worried about turnover and about how to keep the better talent on my team, that people are more able to change their jobs after a home office trend. The key thing around the reason why people would leave, two reasons. First of all, it may be voluntary because they don't understand the roles that they are going to fit into in this new transformation. So this is why that communication and the stakeholder management is so key. So many people leave going through this because the disruption is so hard. They have change fatigue. They don't know what the change is going to result in. All they know is there's some order coming from up high to say you're going to do things in a different way. And you're missing the why. Why are we doing this? Which is why that communication is so important. And especially for the TMO to be very, very clear about the communications, that's a key part of the Chief Transformation Officer and all the various people inside the organizations. One question that Ishmael had is, what's the location of the TMO in the organization? And so that's a great segue into a key idea that the TMO is something that happens at the corporate level, but also inside each of the divisions. One financial services company I talked to had a person at the C-suite level driving TMO alongside all the other departments. But then also in each of the divisions, they also had a transformation officer working with the president of that division. And the president was sharing with me, he spends between 25 and 50% of his time talking to his transformation specialists, who then works across all the different departments inside of that division. So the TMO in many many organizations becomes its own organization with a hierarchy, with career progressions and skills development. And that is a key reason why it begins looking like a department in the same way that you would have around program management or strategy and also transformation. In fact, I see some places where all three of those functions sit together in an office that talks about change at three different levels. And they have representation up and down throughout the organization. Uh, One of the things that I feel so strongly about is that the reason why, Jay, to your question, should this be temporary or should it not? The arguments for being temporary are pretty strong. First of all, this is temporary. And this is something which is going through for the short term. And so we don't need this to be a permanent function. We're going to go through this transformation and it's going to have an end date. The other reason is that it doesn't mess with the existing hierarchy. People don't have to worry about, well, is this person going to be my boss now? If they're in the transformation office, is they're telling me what to do? And just remove all of that to say, this is temporary. They're here to support you, but then they're going to go. My sense is this: transformation never stops. We may be going through this here today, but we're going to be continuing this transformation. There's always going to be something more to do, primarily because our customers keep changing. They keep moving fast, and we're going to have to constantly change and transform ourselves to meet their needs. Sometimes those transformations are going to be big, huge efforts. Sometimes they'll be slower, but we'll have an idea what that looks like. And that 6-quarter walk, in terms of what that change needs to be going into the future, is going to give you a lot of insight into the fact and the reality that this isn't going away. And so when transformation becomes a part of the way that we work, it's an expectation that we're going to have to constantly change. Then it calls into question, should transformation management also become a discipline and something that you learn, you can move into, and know that you have a career in it? When that happens, then there's a call and a reason to make it a permanent function and presence inside of organizations. So, Jay, we can have a discussion about this at some point. I have been having a lot of discussions with many of my other colleagues and professionals in the fields about whether this should be permanent or not. I am definitely in the minority, but think about it. Think about whether you want to do that, want to talk about how do you make transformation embedded into your organization. Okay, so let's see a couple other points that I do want to make, and that is the role of the Chief Transformation Office and an officer, and what it takes to be this person who is leading this whole transformation management activities. First of all, you've got to be a disruptor. You've got to have that disruption mindset. And I think in particular, there is a very special role of them being a realist optimist. They're a realist about what the reality is about this organization. Where are the tensions? Where are the opportunities? Where are the places where we're falling short? And then also an optimist in the way that you think that this can change. We believe that this could be better in the future. But this is a really hard role because you need to disrupt the status quo while also not alienating and not antagonizing the existing leaders and the structure that's there. This is a really delicate dance. And I think of it literally as a dance. If you've ever done any sort of dancing, ballroom dancing, jazz dancing, any kind of dance with a partner, there is typically a lead person who is leading the steps, deciding where to go. But it also requires that the other partner, dance partner, know what the steps are, be trained, be anticipating. And there has to be great communication between the two. And that's how I think about the Chief Transformation Officer operating as. You're going to be dancing with the organization. And that doesn't mean that you can just tell everybody and dictate everything that has to happen. The key part of this, again, is that architecting and the planning, but it's also about your ability to have credibility when you are going through the change and management efforts. When you show up at a meeting, how are you going to establish that credibility? How are people going to believe you and listen to you? Because in many cases, you may not have that inherent authority based on a hierarchy. So is it because the chief executive officer, the CEO, is saying this person is charged with a big responsibility, please work with them? Is it because other people, because of your past experiences, that you have credibility, you've done this someplace else, so you're going to do it here? Those are two great ways to do it. But without those two things, in the end, it's about that personal relationship you build with people and how well you can establish credibility for the purpose and the objective you're setting forth and the relationship of trust you can build with them. So, and I think the last point is that you do have to be digitally savvy. There's no way to be a transformation officer today and not walk the talk. And you have to talk the walk. I was speaking again with this financial services president, again, somebody who is functioning as the transformation officer alongside the actual TMO, but can speak the language. I have not heard a president talk so much tech in a long time, but personally well vested and versed in all the intricacies around transformation. This person wasn't just handing it off to somebody, was absolutely living the transformation, knew all the excruciating details about what was happening. So a couple of things into here. Just want to see what else is in here. And there's so many comments. Hopefully I can go through all of them. Let's see. Um, there is Abu is asking TMO if you're joining late. TMO is the Transformation Management Office, a centralized area. Dr. M is saying, do you need to revisit the mission and vision in its transformation dynamic? Again, I feel that the mission and vision, the purpose, all those things are oftentimes set by the strategy group. So the role of transformation isn't to revisit those areas. Those are set in the organization. But we may be translating that into what does that mean now for this new objective? How do we live this, live our mission and vision through these new transformation efforts? How do they tie back to what's going on there? Jay is saying that that the state of California has been going through heavily into transformation, but has become sclerotic, meaning very much internally looking and not moving very far, very quick. Let's see, Ruben has be the change in the world you want to see type of leader. Absolutely. Again, I think modeling the way is one of the core tenets of leadership, and that couldn't be more true here. And let's see, I think that's the comments that I have for now. I want to talk very quickly about notions, other ways of organizing like holocracy or agile. Agile, again, is not so much an organizational model, but much more of a way of working. I'm a big fan of different aspects of agile because it has at its core tenet that you're never quite done. You're not going to work on one big waterfall, big idea, just work and work and work until it's perfect and then release it. The idea is that you're going to try early on with small experiments, small sprints of work, push it out there, see if it works, let it refine your work plan, and then move forward. Many studies have actually shown that agile and waterfall actually end up in the same place and about the same time and same budget. The difference is that when you use agile, you reduce significantly the risk of the system actually working. With waterfall, you don't know until the very end when you push the button and turn it on whether it's actually going to work or not. So just very different philosophies in the end about how you actually work. Holocracy is sort of agile on steroids. The idea is that you are operating instead of in a hierarchy. There is no hierarchy. It's a way of managing and organizing a company where there's no assigned roles and everybody has the flexibility to take on the task and the roles and do the jobs that they think is most important. Now, this may sound like complete and total chaos. And the way that holocracy tempers that is that it has a very set way of governing all of that work with circles and committees and approving assigned roles. And it's great. The best reason for holocracy is that it pushes decision making down to the very front lines to where the people who have the most data information and have the greatest impact on that decision and the outcomes are living. Who better to make a decisions than the people at the front lines where it's going to impact, rather than sending it up the hierarchy and back down? The biggest disadvantage is that it really requires that everybody agree and that there's also these communications going between these circles. So in the end, you still have hierarchies of communications that go along, that need to make sure that everyone is in line because you don't have the hierarchies of systems. Instead, you have these processes for gaining alignment, and that can be excruciatingly slow. So we can, I think the whole idea of holacracy again is distributed authority. So I think that core tenet, that idea has a lot of legs in terms of organizing the work, pushing down the decision making to the very lowest level that you can. Because frankly, those people have probably the best information rather than pushing it up. This ties into transformation because the speed at which you can work and also the stakeholders that you can get involved become much more distributed when you use some of these ideas. But I think that the issue with holacracy is that it works for smaller organizations and becomes that the information and alignment load on holacracy becomes so overwhelming in larger organizations, it can really bog things down. So, Jay, hopefully that answers some of the questions that you have there. And so this is the key thing I would say. And BNA, thank you so much for this comment because this is my last point. And that is transformation is not easy. It is 90%, I think, the way you put it, people revolt. And I think that is absolutely true. Oftentimes, when I talk with organizations about digital transformation, they think, okay, what are the technologies, the platforms? Let's talk about the digital things. That is not, that's the easy part. The data, the technology, all of that is fairly straightforward. The really hard part is the people part. The fact that your culture is fundamentally going to change because of this transformation, the way that you work. And so organizing it around the realities of how your organization is structured, the ways that you are today and how you want to be in the future, and then using transformation management offices and that function very strategically in the group, doing it as early as you can and recognizing that is the key to unlocking your transformation success. So I think in the end, this is my key takeaway from this. You've got to think about organizing for your transformation right as you're creating the strategy. How are you going to implement it? Who are the people you're going to put in place? And what are the key elements that are needed to make it successful? So I wish you all the best on that. And I hope that you will join me also for next week's live stream, which I'm going to talk about what's the best career advice you've ever gotten. And would love for you to share again in the stream there when we have the live stream, but also share in advance with me. Just message me on my various social media channels, whichever way you want to reach me, and also respond to the postings that will be announcing this to say and share what's the best career advice you've ever gotten. I think especially right now where we're halfway through the year of 2021, it's a nice time when in the summer doldrums to think about what have you achieved, but also take stock of where you want your career to be going in the future. So thanks so much for joining today, and I hope to see you next week. Thanks and have a great day.